I was actually in Marietta from Monday to Tuesday for a pastor's meeting. All the pastors from this conference were there. All the conference officials were there. And it was all about unity. And so the president of this conference is leading out, and he actually tells all of his executive officers to come on stage. And he says, you know what, in the name of unity, I have to ask forgiveness for some of my pastors. Maybe we didn't support you enough. And he goes through every ethnic group in the conference. The Hispanic stand and the Asian stand and the black pastor stand, and he says, forgive us as a conference for not doing our best for you. Very moving, very spiritual service. And he actually asked, while he was up talking, one of the pastors from this huge group of pastors from all over this conference walked up and stood in front of the president asking for the mic. And he says, Mr. President, we as pastors need to ask forgiveness of you gentlemen for allowing our members to talk down about the conference and not correcting them. It was a moving service. They said, we want to promote unity. We live in an area where there's so many different nationalities, but we need to be unified. This is your president, Velino Salazar. And then he did something I did not expect. I was sitting in the back of the room, and he said, I want to mention a few churches. I can't mention them all, but I want to mention a few churches who are living out unity, the unity that the conference is not living out. But there's some churches that are living out unity. He said, I only want to mention just a few. And the next words out of his mouth were, the Culver City Church is living out unity, even though the conference isn't. And he asked me to stand. And he said, in 70-year history, I want to introduce you to Culver City's first black pastor. And the room erupted. They are living out the unity that the conference wants to live out. And he said, Pastor Callie, I want to commend you for being willing to pastor a church that didn't necessarily look like you. Afterwards, I'm bombarded by a bunch of preachers. And one of them actually confessed. He said, my church is blessed by you. There's a church, I'm not going to call them, but they're very close to here. He said, my members visit, and they come back and tell me what a blessing they had experiencing worship at Culver City. I got a question for you guys. What have they seen in thine house? What have they seen in thine house? You all know the story of Hezekiah, and for those who don't know, I'll give you a little background. There's not a lot mentioned about him, but there is a significant amount in the Bible. Here we have the situation with the children of Israel. They have divided into the northern kingdom and to the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. And along comes this guy named Hezekiah. Hezekiah is king, but if we go back to 1 Kings, you'll understand that Hezekiah follows his dad Ahaz. Now, for those of you who know Hezekiah, let me ask you this question. Is Hezekiah a good king or a bad king? Now, how many of you say that Hezekiah was a good king? Raise your hand. Okay, all right. Just Soka. All right. Now, how many of you think Hezekiah was a bad king? Oh, wait a minute, 1 and 1? Somebody break the tie. How many of you believe Hezekiah was a bad king? Just one. All right. He was a good king. There is an underlying theme that runs through the book of Kings when you start, and it is, and there rose up a king of Israel that knew not the Lord. Time and time again, the story is another king would come and he knew not the Lord. I told you Ahaz was his father, and Ahaz was a wicked king. He brought in idols and started worshiping other gods into God's sanctuary. After all God has done for his people, how in the world does a king come up and arise and start bringing in idols and worshiping them and offering their children to these gods as burnt offerings? This is Ahaz. And the likelihood of Hezekiah doing the same thing is highly probable. King after king, king after king. And in the book of Kings, 1 Kings, going into to 2 Kings, this word comes up, and this king did evil in the sight of the Lord. Over and over, and this king did evil in the sight of the Lord. So with Hezekiah following his dad Ahaz, who was a wicked king, the chances of him being wicked are highly probable. But something is different in King Hezekiah. Right off the bat, when you start with his story as king, the Bible says that Hezekiah pleased the Lord. You guys aren't getting excited about that. After all of these wicked kings, even his father, the Bible says, Hezekiah pleased the Lord. See, the greatest battle you will face, listen to me, Culver City, the greatest battle you will face is not from the things you've picked up in this life. It's the stuff that you're born with. I'm going to say it again. The greatest struggle you will have is not the things that you picked up in this life, not the stuff that you picked up, the bad habits you picked up in the war. It's the stuff that you're born with. By nature, what you have a proclivity to. You need an example? I'll give it to you. Remember how weak David was when it came to women? You remember Bathsheba? He saw her on the top of the roof, and he called for the royal binoculars. And his son Solomon follows in the same steps. The same weakness, the same proclivity. So Hezekiah has a strong chance of following in his father's wicked king's footsteps, but I'm glad the Bible says he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. And Hezekiah comes in as king, and he removes all of these idols and strips all of this stuff out of the sanctuary, and he brings the musicians back into the sanctuary, and he makes it a place of worship again. Hezekiah is a bad boy. He brings all of the offerings, and he takes the gold and the silver of these idols that they've made, and they're melted down, and he's bringing all of this stuff back into the house of God. He did what was good in the eyes of the Lord. And when you do things that are good, be sure that the Satan is going to try and tear it down. As he's building it up and he's building the people and he's bringing the temple back and he's consecrated the temple again, here comes the Assyrians saying, we don't care what y'all are doing. If you don't bow down to us, we will take everything that you have. Well, we don't care what you're doing, Hezekiah. If you don't bow down to our king Sennacherib, all of you will be dead. Isaiah is there, and he is prophesying, and he's helping Hezekiah. Now we're at chapter 19. The Bible says that Hezekiah gets this message from the king, gets this letter, and he starts to pray. When trouble comes to your life, is your first reaction to panic or to pray? When it looks like stuff's not going to make, when it looks like you've got more months than you got money, do you panic or do you pray? Hezekiah has got this ultimatum from this king Sennacherib, and he's telling them, listen, you're king and you're doing all this stuff, and they think highly of you, but you got to bow down to me. I've already taken captive Israel. What makes you think I won't capture you? What makes you think the same God that allowed me to take Israel will keep me from taking you? The Bible says Hezekiah, he didn't panic. Read it when you get home, chapter 19. He didn't panic, and he prayed. Oh, things happen when you start praying. Things happen when you go to God first. Are you listening? When the money's tight and you say, I got to go get some money from my brother-in-law. Or do you say, before I go to my brother-in-law, let me tell God about this thing? He went to God, and as a result of Hezekiah's prayer, the Bible says in verse 19, a wonderful story. Callie, you're right, wonderful story. As a result of him praying, God sent an angel into his camp. This king Sennacherib sent an angel into his camp, and the angels killed 185,000 soldiers. And then sent word to Sennacherib that you're going to die too. Sennacherib fled, and he was ambushed by his own sons and died. When God fixes it, he fixes it. A wonderful life lived. A wonderful life lived this guy Hezekiah. He obeyed God. He brought grace back to the temple. He brought the people back to the temple. He increased the storehouse. They had valuable oils and cattle and gold and silver. And when we catch up with them where our focus text is, let's look at chapter 20, verse 1. In those days was Hezekiah sick unto death. He served many years. And the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amoz, came to him and said unto him, Thus saith the Lord, set thine house in order, for thou shalt die and not live. The prophet is telling him, hey, it's time to lay down. Just like Moses, listen, you're going up to the mountain. This is it for you. Get your affairs in order. But what changed in Hezekiah's story. The next verse tells us, then he turned his face to the wall and did what? I can't hear you. And did what? The same Hezekiah, a younger king, who caused God to move on the Assyrian. They were wicked, wicked, wicked people. Here he is, almost at the end of his life, and he prayed unto him, saying, look at his prayer in verse 3. I beseech thee, O Lord, remember now how I walked with thee. It's good sometimes to remind, even though God doesn't need the reminding. Tell him what you've done. Lord, I've paid tithe and I serve the church and I give Bible study. Let him know. He's telling them, I've been perfect in heart, and I've done that which was good in thy sight. And Hezekiah wept. And because he pleaded, and because he was honest, and because he was listen. If God knows everything, why do you pray trying to hide some things? Why do you pray to God as if he doesn't know all there is to know about you? Some of us need to pray like Hezekiah prayed. He prayed, he said, I've done all this good in your name and in your sight. And the Bible says, and it came to pass before Isaiah was going out into the middle court that the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, next verse, turn again and tell Hezekiah that the captain of my people, thus saith the Lord, the God of David thy father, I have heard thy prayers. Sounds like we need to change our prayers. I've heard thy prayers, and I've seen thy tears. Behold, I will heal thee. On the third day thou shalt go up unto the house of the Lord, and I will add unto thy days, how much? 15 years. And I will deliver thee and this city out of the hands of kings of Assyria. And I will defend this city for mine own sake and for my servant David's sake. I've heard your prayers. And in 3 days, I'm going to raise you up. And I'm going to raise you up for 15 years. He's doing a great job. He's doing a great work. Thank you. That's my wife, by the way. That's not just some crazy woman off the street throwing water bottles. I've seen it. I've seen your work. I heard your prayers. I've seen your tears. But most of all, I'm reading your heart. I will defend the hands of the Syrians, and I will defend thy city for my sake and for the sake of thy servant David. Next verse. And Isaiah said, take a lump of fig. And they took it and laid it on the boils, and he recovered. Now, it hadn't been 3 days yet, so Hezekiah is anxious. Hezekiah is anxious, and Hezekiah said unto Isaiah, what shall the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up into the house of the Lord on the third day? Next verse. And Isaiah said, the sign shall be that the Lord will do things that have been spoken to you. So the shadow, remember they had those sundials. So the shadow go forward 10 degrees or go back 10 degrees. Well, the clock's going to tick anyway. That's not a big enough sign. This is what I'm going through Hezekiah's mind. Like, the shadow's going to go forward no matter what because the sun is moving. So if you're going to do something for me, God, turn the shadow backwards. In other words, make the clock go backwards. How many of you would love to go back? Look at this guy. You guys are too young to be needing to. All the 19, 20-year-olds raise their hands. What do you have need to go back in time for? But us old folk, 44, us old folk, elderly, you want to go back? You want to go back to maybe the time when your kids were young? Yeah. You don't raise your hand if this applies to you. You may want to go back to that one that got away. Yeah, that one right there, that should have been my wife. Maybe there's some mistakes in your life that you regret and you wish you could go back. I'm with Hezekiah. If you're going to do something for me, make the time go back. So he literally makes the time go back. Next verse. And it says this, and Isaiah said, this sign shall thou have of the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he has spoken. Shall the shadow go forward 10 degrees or go back? Hezekiah says the same verse. And Hezekiah says, I would love that the light would go forward. Next verse. And Isaiah the prophet cried unto the Lord, and he brought the shadow 10 degrees backwards, by which it had gone down in the dial of Ahaz. At that time, we need to make black screen so I can see. Baladon, and the son of, there we go, thank you, king of Babylon, sent letters and presents unto Hezekiah, for they heard that Hezekiah had been sick. God will bless you in some ways that even your enemies will say, good to see you back on your feet. Have you ever experienced that? Yeah. Even your enemies will say, hey, you know what, man, I heard you. It's good to see you back. Hezekiah's story is great up until this point. Hezekiah's story, it's perfect. As a matter of fact, maybe it would have been better that he died when he was sick, because he would have had a perfect life, as perfect as one can have. But because he pleaded with God that God will give him 15 more years, a life that was well lived to God, a life that although there were tons and tons and tons of kings that did evil in the sight of the Lord, Hezekiah broke the cycle. Next verse. And Hezekiah hearkened unto them. Hezekiah is still good. And he showed them all of the house, and the precious things, and the silver, and the gold, and the spices, and the precious ointments, all of the house, the armor, and all that was found in the treasures. There was nothing. Did you guys listening? There was nothing. Everybody say nothing. There was nothing in his house, nor in all of his dominion, that Hezekiah didn't show them. Then came Isaiah, the prophet, unto the king of Hezekiah, and said unto him, What said these men? And from whence came they unto thee? And Hezekiah said, They are come from a far country, even from Babylon. Next verse. Pay attention. And he said, What have they seen in thine house? Hezekiah, what did you show them? They came from afar. Hezekiah, what did you do? I showed them all the things. I showed them the gold. I showed them the treasures. I showed them. Hezekiah answered, all the things that are in the house, that they've seen it. And all the things among my treasures, and I've showed them all. Next verse. This is probably the last one you have. Right? And Isaiah said unto Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord. Next verse. Behold, the day comes that all that is in thine house, and that which my fathers have laid up in store unto the day, shall be carried away into Babylon. Nothing shall be left, saith the Lord. Hezekiah was a perfect king. He did everything right. Hezekiah broke the repetitiveness of evil kings. Hezekiah did everything right until when these Babylonians came, that Hezekiah lost himself and he started to focus on himself. And out of pride and boasting, he showed them all the gold, all the treasures, all the things he had accomplished. And as a result, God says that everything will be taken away. What have they seen in thine house? That was the problem. That was Hezekiah's one mistake. He showed them all the gold, and he showed them all the treasures, and he showed them all the expensive oils. He was boasting about his wealth. They came to see, but the problem was Hezekiah showed them the wrong thing. You see, Hezekiah should have taken them to that bed that he was sick on and said, I was about to die until I cried unto the Lord, and I turned my face against that wall, and God delivered me. What have they seen in your house, Hezekiah? Hezekiah should have taken them to that same dial, and he says, you know what? The Lord sent me a sign that if I'm faithful, that he would turn back the time. What have they seen in your house, Hezekiah? He showed them the wrong thing. It's not about this gold. It's not about this silver. It's not about these expensive oils. Hezekiah, you should have shown them what God did for you. What have they seen in this house? People who visit our church, and they're coming. When people come to our church, you know, we're blessed because, put the picture on the screen, the first picture. The statement has been made that we've got the best sanctuary in our region. Isn't that beautiful? But that ain't what they should see when they come in this house. We've actually got a $6 million building project. Put that down on the screen. This is what our new development's going to look like. But now go to the second picture. These are some renderings of how it would look like when you walk inside of our church. It's wonderful. It's beautiful. But guess what? That's not what I want them to see. We were honored by our president for having lived out the unity. For having lived out unity in our church when even the conference hadn't caught up to where we are. That's a high compliment. And I love that about us. But that's not what I want people to see when they come into Culver City. What are they seeing? Thine house? I want them to see Robert, who had a liver transplant. And he's still here today.
Thank you, Jesus.
And cancer for his wife. That's what I want to see in this house when they come to see you, when they come to see that Soka had a heart condition that led him to be in a wheelchair. But guess what? He's still here. Enrique, our head deacon, having seizures and had to have surgery, and he's got a scar. He's not willing to, he's not shy to show it to you. When they come into this house, show them what God has done for you. Our head elder has had cancer. He's a cancer survivor. What do they see? Yes, a $6 million person. That's good. Yeah. The nicest sanctuary in the region. Yeah. That's not show them what God has done for you. Show them Walter Williams, who through the Osborne family was able to get a heart transplant coming from another country. Let them see that when they come to Culver City. What have they seen in their house? Show them my new friend Danny, who the Lord brought back to this church after 20 years. What have they seen in the house? Let our answer be, I'm going to show you what the Lord has done for me. God bless you.